Welcome once again to Jazz Perspectives and to the Fort Worth Public Library's Jazz Archives. Mike Price here, as usual. We're in the process of visiting with Jack Cannon, one of the acknowledged great jazz violinists. A lot of people tend not to associate the four-stringed instrument with jazz. Here's a man who'll help you change your mind if you're among that camp. Welcome in.
Thank you for having me. I'm very interested in this project.
We're preserving the living history of jazz in Texas. And, speaking of which, you've got a career that goes back how many years?
From 1942 until today, I've been a totally full-time violinist.
Working musician.
Working musician.
And you started at what, age 17, was it?
I started when I was 4 years old.
4 years old. Tell me your birth date.
November the 18th.
1924. 1924, and you were born in
Fort Worth.
Fort Worth. You mentioned a little while ago that you grew up with Carroll Hubbard, another of the great Texas jazz violinists.
And his brother Leon. Played excellent violin, no jazz.
No jazz, right. Fascinating stuff. Well, I've got a long history with the Hubbards in my own career as a player, pianist, and always fascinated to find somebody who can coax jazz out of the violin. Or is it a fiddle? Which term do you prefer?
I prefer violin, but in the business, even Heifetz says I'm a fiddle player, you know.
Heifetz, Jascha Heifetz.
Yeah.
Big influence on you, I think.
Yes.
How did that come about? You're talking about the what folks used to call long hair music, but it's interrelated with jazz. How did that come about for you?
I came in. I was on Jack Fina's band. He was a guy with Freddie Martin that did all the Tchaikovsky tunes like "Tonight We Love" and so forth, and
turn them into pop ballads.
Yeah. And I was working with Jack. And he was a delightful man to work with, good player, and so forth.
There's a jumble of information there. Now, how did you connect with Jascha Heifetz?
All right. We were in the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, and I was playing there, and with Jack Fina's band.
Right.
And I did numbers on the show. And unknown to me, Heifetz had been there for the show earlier. And so I knew this guy had a reputation for having a humor about him.
Right.
You know, I mean, a hard case humor. So I walked up and I said, "Hey, Jascha, why don't you get lost, man?" I said, "You play too goddamn good. You make me nervous." Ha, ha, ha. Sit down, kid, you know.
Oh, my goodness.
And here's Heifetz, you know. And here's the reason that I was there. There was a viola player that was from Germany, and he was on Fina's band. And he was out of his element with a commercial and jazz group.
More of a classical background?
Strictly a classical. If you didn't have a note in front of it, forget it. And he wanted to work with the symphony orchestra.
Oh.
So at the hotel where we were, they were interviewing prospects for the Dallas Symphony.
Wow.
And the conductor was there, and he had said to me, "I saw your show." He says, "Have you got a classical background at all?" And I said, "Yes." And he says, "Well, you play the instrument well." He says, "Would you like to work with Dallas Symphony?" And I said, just curiosity. I said, "Well, what would it pay?" Big fat $75 a week, you know.
Ooh-wee.
I said, man, you got any idea what I'm making right here, what I'm doing?
Exactly.
You know.
Yeah.
And he said, well, don't you want to do anything for art? And I said, no, I don't even remember his last name.
Nice. Yeah.
So this
A good comeback.
German guy wanted to make a contact with Dallas Symphony.
That's the viola player. Mm-hmm.
A viola, or his real instrument was viola, but
Sure.
he played violin.
Mm-hmm.
And he was bugging the heck out of me to take him up to meet this conductor.
Oh.
So here's the guy sitting right by me, and here's the conductor. I said, this guy, Eric Forster was his name.
Mm-hmm.
He says, now here's a guy that would give his front seat in hell to be in the Dallas Symphony, you know? And so he took him over in the side, and he hired him, and the guy finished out his whole life with the Dallas Symphony playing viola
Wow.
for all those years.
Nice work if you can get it. But you had other ambitions.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and the Heifetz.
And how did Heifetz encourage you? We were talking a little bit about that
Okay.
earlier.
I say, when I told him, whoever it was, I said, you got any idea what I'm making? This? And I said, what do you think about that? I said, would that interest you if you were me? And he says, kid, let me put it this way. Says, you wouldn't take a job as a woodcutter, would you?
Wow. $75 a week indeed.
Well, but regardless, playing what it does. Now, did you know that Heifetz played a fair amount of jazz?
I have heard that, but
Yes,
I'm
he
not
did.
familiar with his output in that realm as so much as I am with his classical.
Oh,
work.
of course. And I'm not even sure he wanted to be associated with anything except the classical
Sure.
thing, but he did. And I went out to his house on occasion when we were on the ships. I was on the President Lyons, the President Cleveland,
Sailing out of
and
San
the
Francisco.
President Wilson out of San Francisco
Right.
to the Orient and return. Went to Hong Kong, the furthest of right, and then returned by way of Japan.
As a house band on the liners.
Mhm.
Right. Amazing stuff.
And I had this guy, David Wheat. And if you know as many people as you do, I'm sure you know whether the name rings a bell or not, because he went by the name of Buck Wheat.
Buckwheat. Mm-hmm.
His father was a dentist in San Antonio.
Yeah.
And Dave was a fabulous player on bass and
Bass
guitar.
and guitar. Uh-huh.
And he even actually sang very well.
Mm.
But his harmonic knowledge was unbelievable.
Would it be safe to say that you learned as much theory from that kind of experience as you had in your formal
I
studies?
learned more the first 5 minutes than I had in all those years. And I had a Phi Mu Alpha scholarship to North Texas. And that was a whole general where we were doing harmony and the violin, of course,
Right.
and so forth. I learned more from Buck about harmony than you would have ever thought about.
Now, what was his secret to teaching that to you? Was it listen to the bass? Was it?
But you listen to the bass, and your ear will tell you what the chord is.
Yeah.
And he says it will all just come to you in a very nice way, and you won't have to just doggedly pursue it. You know, he says the only thing, don't work with any bad bass players.
Exactly. Well, now you started studying at age 4, right?
Yeah.
Where did you? Was this in a conservatory or
No,
in
I
private
was
lessons?
writing in Fort Worth here, and I don't even remember my teachers. I remember there was a woman named Mrs. J.C. Neal that taught private lessons,
Sure.
and she taught me rudiments and
Yeah.
violin, and evidently fairly well.
Something
Mhm.
registered with you.
Now,
How old were you when you discovered your that instinctive ability to improvise?
I don't know, it just was there.
Uh-huh.
And you would be playing somewhere and somebody would do something
And you'd respond.
you know, and be our guest, you know. And so I don't guess I really got deeply into jazz until it became when the movement was, what was the name that they gave, progressive.
Oh, the progressive movement,
In
that
other
would be
words, everything harmonically moved in sync and so forth.
in the period
and
after.
then you got into really what you're playing and what it is, and
What kind of music did you listen to as a child?
probably just about everything.
Now, this would have been during the jazz age of the 20s, the Depression years.
Yeah.
Did you listen to, say, Joe Venuti?
Oh yes,
Because
yes.
that was his prime of
Yes.
productivity.
yes, and we had some local players here. You may remember a guitar player named J.B. Brinkley.
Just by reputation.
Yes. Now J.B. was a monster understander of chords.
Uh-huh.
And JB, you know, is talking to me like we're talking. And well, this is a B flat 9, flat 5, and so forth. No, until that became like English, you know,
Sure.
you're speaking it. So JB had a big influence on me to don't just play the damn melody, you know. Know what the structure is, man.
Know how it's built. Your younger days coincided with the rise of a very interesting form of Texas jazz called Western swing.
Yeah.
Bob Wills,
And
Milton Brown, like that. Did you ever connect with those?
No interest in it.
No interest.
whatsoever. I just never was a country boy.
So you never sold out to the cowboy movement.
No, I worked WBAP with Carol,
With Carol Hubbard, right?
and we were both house musicians. And I did play solos and so forth.
Sure.
But Carol was the Western swing guy.
Carol went more with the Western
and
swing
I let him
identity.
take the whole thing and had no desire to get into that.
Did you ever find yourself listening to Paul Whiteman during these years?
Worked with him.
Worked with him?
Yeah,
Wow.
right here in this town
Wow.
at Colonial Country Club.
Uh-huh.
He did a concert, and we, I don't remember all the hours that were involved, but it was a big deal that we worked, one night for 4 or 5 hours. And yeah, playing his old stuff.
Sure. Yeah, Paul had some very lasting ties to Fort Worth because of the
Yeah.
centennial in '36.
That's right.
And wow, that's what a pedigree.
Yeah. I lived in San Francisco for a long time. And I don't know whether you knew a guy named Jerry Mulligan.
Oh yes, the Tentet.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All right, Jerry comes along about that time.
and that's the post-World War II period, right?
And that was the first time I had run across the name progressive jazz.
Sure.
And boy, oh boy, I heard that quintet or whatever it was.
He had bands that ranged in size from 5 up to 10 and more pieces.
Yeah. But he worked as about a 4-piece thing, 4 or 5 guys a lot, and Jerry Mulligan quintet or quartet.
Sure.
And I just thought that was wonderful. I just thought that was the greatest thing I'd ever heard.
What was it about that music that appealed to you more than the traditional 2-beat jazz?
Oh, the chord structures.
Chord structures?
See, he was into real changes,
Oh yeah.
big changes. And that just absolutely drove me, you know. I've written a whole library for string quartet plus piano and bass.
Yeah.
And all with big chords. and man, it sounds, everything.
A lot of
is,
motion.
Yeah.
Did you ever consider another instrument besides the violin?
Never did.
That's good. That's,
No.
Any difficulty finding the violin accepted as a jazz instrument?
No.
Yeah.
I guess probably Carol had about the most influence on me because we were so close.
Sure.
And he and his brother were over at my house and vice versa all the time. I mean, it was just like we were one family.
Yeah.
And Carol would do all these things, and a lot of them with J.B. Brinkley.
Uh-huh.
And so J.B. Made me aware of chord structure, really made me aware of chord structure. Not only, he says, you even know this, but you don't know you know it.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
And I said, okay. And so he says, listen to the bottom, and it will guide you.
Just like buckwheat.
And then think about the other, and the fact that the spelling of the chord will come to you.
How did you reconcile that instinctive ability with your formal teaching? Did you ever?
And the two, except that the formal teaching just put me into the ability to play the instrument.
How about reading versus improvising? Where do you stand on that one?
I was probably, in those very early days, probably a very ordinary reader, not exceptional. Then in the Vegas days, I got into all the big acts and everything else, and you had to read.
You had to read
spots right off the page, you know. And I was so lucky there. Man, you talk about a guy that just luck has been my career. Just my wife and I got married in San Francisco, and we were happy with San Francisco and everything. But one day I said, you want to just take a wild chance? She said, it might be interesting. Says, you want to go to Vegas? And she says, yeah, it might be interesting. So we packed up and went to Vegas. And this name you might remember is coming up. We were walking down Main Street, and the guy says, hey, Jack, I hear this, And I turned around, and here's a guy from Texas.
Okay.
His name was Burley Grimes, and he was from Austin, and he's a bass player.
Sure.
You heard of him?
I know the name.
All right. He says, are you working? I said, no, I just drove into town. And he says, Garwood Van is just opening the New Frontier. And he says, he needs a fiddle player.
Wow.
And so I went down, and Garwood says, sit down, and we're reading charts, And so this goes on for about nearly an hour, And finally I said, Garwood, I said, I appreciate the fact that I'm playing some nice stuff in the charts and so forth, but I said, I need to know something. I said, do I get the job? He says, oh, you had the job in the first 5 minutes. Says, can you start tonight?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you did.
Yes.
How much creative freedom did you have in a situation like that? How much could you take off on your own improvisation?
It was open to me.
Wow.
It really was. And the acts were fantastic, like Sammy Davis Jr.
Sure.
And so forth. And Sammy at that time was a group called the Maston Trio, featuring Will Maston Trio, featuring Sammy Davis Jr.
Mm-hmm.
And he was, I guess, at that time, probably no more than late teens.
Well, he was still, was he, what was he doing more at that time, singing or hoofing?
You name it.
You name it. Mm-hmm.
The singing probably came later because he started the thing and he used to start his act sometimes. I remember we were working an act and you saw a spotlight come on, you know?
Yeah.
You heard some tapping, like a drummer, you know, beating some real great time, you know? And here comes Sammy, man, and he's doing it all with his feet.
Yes.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And here's this is my introduction to be able to do something with Sammy. I didn't realize that's why we're talking.
That's why we're talking.
I knew it would start coming out, you know. So conductor comes down and he says, Sammy wants to know if there's any fiddle player with big ears in the group. And I said, and I guess you were interpreting what he meant.
Mm-hmm.
And they pointed at me. And he says, Sammy is doing a thing on Get Us Your Mama on a show.
Sure.
And you probably saw this act, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And he said he wants a guy that plays sort of a gypsy jazz background behind black magic.
Right.
You know?
I know. Mm-hmm.
And that was my introduction to Sammy. And Sammy and his Uncle Will and his father and I became more than a little friends.
Sure.
It lasted, and when he died, I've got all kind of mentions of things that happened during that time.
Goodness gracious.
And lovely, lovely man.
Did you go out to the West
Yeah.
looking for a career or trying to become famous? What was the objective
I never
there?
thought about becoming famous.
Never thought about
I
it.
never worked it from that angle. I didn't. My wife was secretary at MCA. You know what MCA was?
Oh, yes.
And that was the big agency.
Exactly.
All over the United States, and I don't know what more. And she was secretary of the San Francisco office.
Mm-hmm.
And I got tangled up with MCA, and they gave me the ships.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, I stayed too long at the fair, I'll put it that way. I made 16 trips, and they were about 6 weeks each trip, round trip out of San Francisco. You went to the Orient, clear to Hong Kong, and then came back by way of Japan
Kinda like
and Manila. And you really did the Orient. You
A
know?
working vacation, emphasize
Yeah.
on the work.
Sort of. And it was lovely to see. Hong Kong remains one of the greatest cities. I loved that place.
Mm-hmm.
I even considered maybe once living there. It's just a lovely city.
Yeah.
And it was so good to me. I mean, even I'd come in off of a trip and work a job at the Peninsula Hotel in the lobby with a good group.
Wow.
You know? Just walk in and play.
Making music with your friends.
Yeah,
What a racket.
yeah.
That's an amazing experience. The style you play,
Yeah.
you touched on that a little while ago. The big influence was the so-called modern or progressive movement that came in after World War II.
The progressive chord structure.
How do you see yourself as placed in perspective with the other recognized masters of jazz violin?
I didn't try to copy anybody. When you start to play with jazz groups and you have extremely talented rhythm players
Right.
that have a complete understanding of the chord structure,
Yeah.
it all just
It all falls
it reveals
together.
itself. In
Yes.
other words, you've got ears, and you see possibility of a moose.
Right. Well, you and Carol Hubbard practically grew up together.
Yeah,
You both became prominent with the same instrument
yeah,
in jazz, but took drastically different paths.
drastically different.
Now, we were talking about earlier influences. Joe Venuti, the
Yeah.
great New York jazz violinist, Stéphane Grappelli, the great Parisian jazz
Yeah.
violinist. Which of those early masters would you say parallels your work?
Grappelli.
Grappelli,
Yeah,
who remained progressive to the
yeah.
very end.
But when you were playing with chord players, I'll just put it this way,
Right.
and even J.B. Brinkley was in that class.
Sure.
He played beautiful chords to everything. I mean, just the two of us, we'd start playing, you know,
Yeah.
and we'd start building things together. And it was all, everything a player that understands structure, it flows. And it flows with intelligence. And you can hear logical moves. I don't think there's no patent, you know, to tell you what to do, what
No.
time. And the chords influence everything you're going to do.
It's got to be an instinctive response
Yes,
if it's going to be.
and that's exactly what it is a response.
Wow, what a background. Some of the great band leaders you've worked with, you mentioned Paul Whiteman.
Yeah.
Tell me about Xavier Cugat.
Cugat was a nice man. He was, let's see, well, he was half Latin and half Jewish.
Uh-huh.
And the Jewish side, they're all fiddle players. You know, at some time in their life, they were fiddle players.
Great tradition.
He was just barely a fiddle player.
That's why he was a band leader.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And he carried the fiddle at all times and
Sure.
he came out. But I can't even think of the tune. And he wrote a very simple little tune, it may come to me, but that's the only thing that he ever wrote that I know of. And like I say, he fronted the band and he made a little token play once in a great while. He'd play a very simple little thing. But he carried the violin with him. And he'd conduct with the bow.
How did you connect with his orchestra?
That's the one that is quite a story. I'm starting to repeat myself.
Oh, no, I'd love to hear it.
No, I came in again off the ships, and I'm walking down in front of the Musicians Union,
In San Francisco, right? Uh-huh.
and Pop Kennedy, the president of the local, said, "Hey, Jack, where are you doing? Where you been?" I said, "Well, Pop, I said, you know I've been on the ships." I said, "Well, I hadn't been keeping up with it." He said, "What are you doing in town?" I said, "Well, I'm taking a 2-week break from the Oregon, you know."
Right.
And he says, "Well," says, "Cugat's down to Fox Theater right now." And he says he's rehearsing, and he's looking for a fiddle player.
Great.
And so the Fox from the Union was just a few blocks down to Market Street.
So much for your vacation.
Yeah. And so I walked up and introduced myself. He said, "You got your violin?" I said, "Yeah." "Okay. Just, let's go." That started it.
That's great.
Yeah.
Now, the material that Cugat was using,
Yeah, it was written.
all written, how much freedom, how much...
Plenty. There again would be the ego of the two people that you were talking about.
Uh-huh.
He was delightfully tolerant of anything I wanted to do. I'll put it that way.
Yeah.
He did not make suggestions. Maybe he would say a certain tune or something,
Sure.
you know. But really, it was a very free and nice relationship.
You must have had really responsive audiences
Yeah,
and club managers and band leaders
yeah,
in order to accomplish what you've done in creating a distinctive style.
yeah.
Matter of luck, I guess. We
I
were
guess,
talking about that.
Do you remember the Galveston days when the Balinese was in operation?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All right. The Balinese was an extremely lovely supper club.
Mm-hmm.
It was maybe as interesting as the finest in New York or anything. It was just a real classic place.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked it with several bands, and then I worked it with Fina. And the Texas Mafia, Sam Maceo, and this, I'm not talking out of school. It's been in all the books and everything else, you know,
Right.
and identified that way. I'm not.
No.
I'm not-
This is a matter of history.
Yes. So I'm not ratting on the mob, you know. But anyway, Sam was a very, very nice man, and I had played it with somebody that was so unimportant that I don't even remember the name. I played it the first
Sure.
time. And so I knew Sam to say hello.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew the Fertitas and so forth. Then I came in with Jack Fina, and Jack Fina was a Siciliano.
Okay.
All right, that opened the door.
Mm-hmm.
Since I was very close with Jack, they accepted me like I was one of the boys, you know. And it was could do no wrong, boy. They fed us at intermission and everything else royally. And they just treated us wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Balinese was a mafia joint.
Yeah. Did you find the audiences receptive to what you were doing as opposed to? I've talked to so many players from the last century who recall very little creative freedom.
Yeah.
Club owners who would post signs backstage reading "Where's the melody?"
All right.
like that.
I'll tell you how much freedom really I had.
Mm-hmm.
Jack was a tremendous piano player of his type.
Which was
That was, like I said, expanding on Tchaikovsky into popular tunes and so forth. Wonderful technique and so forth. Not any chord genius,
right.
and not a jazzer.
That's
All right. We worked the Balinese, and across from the Balinese, there was a place called the Pirate Club.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't think of the owner. It was a woman. And there was a piano player there, Greek guy.
Mm-hmm.
His name was Connie Iliopoulos.
Good.
So, and Connie was a true jazz player, gorgeous jazz player. And he was not just an ignorant person that played jazz. He was a pianist that had,
Had a real understanding.
a real
of the theory.
understanding
Sure.
of the instrument and structure. And we had all kind of side things that were happening. Well, Fina, you'd have to give the man credit. He was not in that bag.
Right.
So he would book the jobs for me and Connie and a bass player.
Wow.
And we would do them.
Mm-hmm.
And so Jack was, I got no gripes with Jack.
Sounds like he appreciated the art.
Yeah, man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And had that booking ability.
Yeah. Well, I've been so lucky with those kind of things.
After so many years in Vegas,
Yeah.
San Francisco, what brought you home to Texas?
just wanting to come home.
Come home.
And I came in not expecting to make what I was making out in Vegas and so forth.
Sure.
And so forth. So, came back in town, and I have no idea if you know who I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
There was a woman in Dallas, Ann Draper,
Mm-hmm.
and she was a society columnist for the Dallas Morning News.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even remember how the contact happened, but naturally she had to hear us playing.
Sure.
And she had an agency called Ann Draper's Party Service.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, it was instant love at first sight, because she says, I'm Ann Draper and I have a lot of work, society jobs, society work.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this sounds good, you know, but I had no idea of the amount of work.
Oh, yeah.
Now, over a period of 30 years, a lot of it with Ann Draper, I averaged easily 300 jobs a year.
Good gracious.
Yeah, and I'm talking about top society jobs,
Mm-hmm.
like Perot and so forth. People,
We're talking about private
Yes.
social register
Mhm.
events.
different house every night, and the country clubs, and it was parties.
Yeah.
I did in 19...
We're talking about what, this 1970s onward?
I was trying to think of the year, 1959, I think it was.
Uh-huh.
I did 357 private parties.
Good gracious. How many a year do you do now?
Dallas is in a slump
Yeah.
right this minute. You might have heard that.
So
And-
I've, mhm.
And being 83 years old, I'm not out there pushing.
Sure.
And I have lovely things that come along, and choice players like Buddy DeSalvo
Mhm.
and Tommy, guys that are just absolutely top-rate piano players.
Yeah.
And we love to play with each other, and those jobs come up. We go to work, and we would almost pay them to play it. You know.
Now, when you began making the social register scene
Yeah.
in North Texas, how did those audiences differ from your experience with the cruise line and
Not
the
so
clubs?
much, so greatly. It all sprung from one country club in Dallas.
Mhm.
That was the Brook Hollow Country Club, and it's an old family's very rich man's club.
Sure.
And I became friends with many people like Jake and Nancy Hammond.
Mhm.
Those names mean anything to
Oh,
you? And oh boy, what a sweetheart, Nancy Hammond. I remember early in the game, she had heard us somewhere, and she just immediately came up and introduced herself and says, "I'm Nancy Hammond." Says, "We're going to see a lot of each other." And I'm trying to put some of this into perspective. I got a call from her. He says, "I got one I want you to do." And she says, "I want you to get 75 violinists, and you can put any support group you want behind it for the opening of the Fairmont."
Mm-hmm.
And so I do not never go out with just violins. Yeah, I know what you're gonna.
That's that's
the pitfall of fools. You know, to go out with 25 violins sounds like a cat fight.
well. That's good. So how did you work around that one?
Well, she let me have any personnel that I wanted, and I, of course, packed it with real players.
Well,
you
the
know.
secret is in the side men.
Yeah. So then we had the 75 violins strolling through the room. All right. Not me. I and a support group are back there with enough amplification to blow the walls off the back doors.
Of course.
So these guys were just riding free out there playing the melody, you know, with all this happening behind them. And so we've continued to do that kind of thing, and people still try it with just violins, and it's a disaster every
You've
time.
got to have a foundation.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
What are your plans? What's the long-term objective now?
I am right now in a real thinking process as to what I want to do.
Uh-huh.
I love to play,
Yes.
and I will always, if there's nothing else doing, have somebody over at the house and let's play, you know. But I do like to play. I like to have people that like what we're doing. It's fun to be around them.
Yeah.
And so this temporary thing with Dallas, nobody's working right
Sure.
now. I don't know how long a thing like that would last.
Economic slump in
Right.
general.
I did come to the conclusion that I was not going out and ring any doorbells or promote. I'm just going to sit there and let it happen. Well, I got two yesterday. One hotel is being completely refurbished up on the end of I'm trying to think of the name of the street. What's the street Adolphus is on? It's on.
Oh, I know. Yes, the name escapes me. I always navigate Dallas by
Yeah.
by instinct.
Well, this is up the other end.
Sure.
Anyway, somebody's bought a hotel and they're spending hundreds of millions of dollars refurbishing
Downtown
it.
area.
That's up the other end. Then I got a call that says I'll said just leave it to me. I'll get back to you. But the Adolphus is going to go into a new program to do like they did in the past and have a combo or string quartet
Sure,
or something in the lobby.
Wow.
And so I like that. I like to play string quartet. You know, it's a good, clean thing, and it's done well. And then it always gives me some more freedom. I've told you about the arrangements for 6 people.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, this started in San Francisco at the Palace. And they had a group in there from South America. And they were a 6-piece group. And this buddy of mine that had been a vice president of whatever hotel there in Dallas, it was I can't think of the name right. Anyway, he had moved on to San Francisco, and he was the manager this time. And he said, Jack, can you come out and put a group in the Palace, you know? And I said, yeah, what do you want? He said, well, it says we can go up to 6 pieces. So I was ready to, with all kind of literature and so forth in the library, to work quartet. So after I got into it a week or two, I started to enlarge it. And then I started to write the arrangements that included piano and bass.
Right.
And so that was when Allegro Strings became an entity.
Of course.
And we stayed in that room for 2 years. You ever remember that Palace Hotel Garden Court?
There you go.
Maybe that's the most beautiful room in in the world.
That's a beautiful venue.
It's gorgeous. Imagine going to work every night in a garden court.
Magnificent setting. So Allegro Strings has remained a constant over a long term for you.
Yes.
New recordings, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
You've been recording quite extensively lately.
Oh, not working at it.
But still creating
Yeah,
a lasting
yeah.
document of what you've accomplished.
And I've got 260 arrangements for those 6 pieces.
Good gracious.
Yeah.
Magnificent work. How do you picture yourself as? How have you changed as an artist over the long term?
Well, I've relaxed an awful lot in the later years. I don't. I made more money with this relationship with Ann and Jim Draper, Party Service,
Sure.
than I had ever expected to make in my life. And it was generally cash, you know, and
Goodness
just
gracious.
wonderful people to work for, you know.
But you seem just as ambitious. Perhaps not in the commercial sense, but in an artistic
Oh,
sense.
yeah.
And how do you sustain that interest?
Oh, a new guy comes along, like there's been an influx into Dallas of. Are you aware of a player named Freddie Crane?
Just by name.
Yeah.
Haven't crossed paths with him. Well, tell me about that.
Well, Freddie, to make a statement like this sounds almost foolish, but I'm gonna make it anyway. I think possibly Freddie was possibly the most talented man that ever was a musician. And that is a mouthful.
It's your declaration. Go ahead and make it.
All right. The guy, I don't know Freddie's background exactly. I became aware of him on a party one night. We were playing somewhere, and he was there, and I was working with a strolling string group or something. And he says, "You want to play one?" I said, "Yeah." You know, and we're standing there playing, just amusing ourselves. And I said, "Holy God, this guy is something else," you know. And so we did a lot of work together. And unbelievable talent.
That sort of influence
Yes.
keeps your interest up and running.
All right.
That's great.
Now, Freddie died, and there's about 4 pianists now that have appeared on the scene in Dallas. And any one of the 4 is just absolutely wonderful. Like a guy named Tommy DeSalvo, a guy named Tommy, oh God,
I know what you mean. The community is
But
difficult
anyway,
to keep track of those great artists.
you run into them on jobs,
Yeah.
and they just say, "Hey, let's play one," you know.
Playing for the love of playing.
Yeah.
And making a career out
Yeah,
of it.
and you know, here's a piano player out there, and he
Nice
comes
work.
up, and introduces himself, and he says, "You want to play one?" I
Sure.
said, "Yeah, bang."
Nice work if you can get it.
Yeah.
Well, goodness gracious, I think.
Well,
we've,
it doesn't take you 5 minutes to figure out what
You
you're
know.
dealing with.
You know if you're in the right place.
Yes, sir.
Well, that's what makes jazz, that instinctive impulse. Well, what a delight to visit with you, sir. I'm most grateful for your time.
Well, I'm certainly grateful that you're grateful.
For Jazz Perspectives and the Fort Worth Public Library Jazz Archive, I'm Mike Price. We've been visiting with Jack Cannon, jazz violinist extraordinaire.
Well, I would have to say it's a wider stream than that, and jazz is certainly a part of it. But I play all kind of violin, and if I had to, I could work with a symphony orchestra.
Even at $75 a week. Thank you so much. Join us again.
The program you have just seen is now available on VHS or DVD. To purchase your own copy, please send $20 check or money order to CCT, 401 West 2nd Street, Fort Worth, Texas 76102. Please allow 4 to 6 weeks for delivery. You are watching Community Cable Television, tuned in to Fort Worth, a most livable community.